Even though Formula 1 content makes up the bulk of what I do, I pretty much enjoy anything that's on four wheels. Things like rallying, touring cars, sports cars, Indy cars, but really it's the history of all of those things that I really enjoy, and I hope you do too. Especially since now, sports cars and endurance racing as a whole is in a new golden era. Following the much-loved LMP1 era and before that the Group C era, the hypercar and LMDH classes that can now overlap between the WEC and IMSA have allowed us to have some utterly amazing machines on the WEC and IMSA tracks. The 963, the 499P, the Valkyrie, and actually, in doing so, the Le Mans hypercar rules have allowed for the teams to come up with some interesting shapes. The wingless Peugeot springs to mind, which now has a wing. But the rules allowed for Peugeot to at least try that. That wouldn't have been possible in LMP1. And at the other end of the grid is everybody's favourite go-to category on racing sims, GT3. Some would say that it's been overdone because there's too many GT3 series out there these days, with DTM becoming one in the last 4 or 5 years, but GT3 has proven to be quite the cost-effective series. With things like BOP and there being so many different series running that particular class, if you can run in one, you can run in all of them. But from a sim racing perspective, I definitely know that I'm GT3'd out. How many weeks did I do in a row of that ACC league back in 2022? But that said, the GT3s in Le Mans Ultimate are fantastic. But one recently departed category is GTE, and one particular GTE caused quite the controversy when it won its class at Le Mans in 2016. And that particular GTE is connected to something I don't normally have on this channel, a sponsor. But today's sponsor is incredibly cool. Check this out. This video has been kindly sponsored by the good people over at REC Watches, a timepiece manufacturer based in Denmark that does things a little differently. REC Watches has been in the industry since 2014, and in that time they've produced watches infused with the DNA of some of the most iconic machines in history. Some of their special edition watches have been made out of parts of Steve McQueen's TR6, Carroll Shelby's prototype Mustang, John DeLorean's personal DMC-12, and an SR-71 Blackbird. Now though, they've come up with something incredible, a watch made from parts of the first ever Ford GT40, chassis P001. Available in blue, green and white, the various parts of the watch are made using repurposed parts of the original car, such as the tachymeter scales being made from the aluminium coolant pipes that were on that chassis. The parts that are repurposed are from salvage, excess or otherwise unusable parts. As REC say themselves, no cars were harmed in the making of these watches. Each of the three colours evokes images of the Ford GT40s that demolished the 24 Hours of Le Mans for 4 straight years, with the Shelby Blue example conjuring up images of not just the GT40, but the Shelby Mustangs, the Cobras and other fast Fords of the 1960s. It's a very touching throwback to a time in motorsport that has since been immortalised in film. Given that they use parts of the original cars, these watches are quite limited, with 17 pre-orders still available at the time of writing and 723 pieces available in total. Pre-orders do come with a 20% discount with delivery available from January 2026. To learn more about REC watches, their history and the rest of their catalogue, including the other products that I mentioned earlier, you can find a link to their website down in the description. So with that, you can probably see where this video is going. Well, I mean, you probably saw where it was going anyway because of the title and thumbnail, but let's not dwell on such minutiae. But the Ford GT40 is an icon of endurance racing, and was immortalised further in the film Ford vs Ferrari, or Le Mans 66 if you live in certain markets, as well as being one of my favourite racing cars of all time. The looks, the story, everything. It destroyed the competition 4 years in a row in 1966, 67, 68 and 69. So for 2016, a very special anniversary was approaching, the 50th anniversary of that original win back in 1966. So Ford decided, you know what, let's do it again. In the June of 2015, Ford announced that Chip Ganassi Racing would be running a homologated GT in the FIA World Endurance Championship, as well as the IMSA Sports Car Championship in North America. At this time, the WEC ran a different top class to IMSA and the overlap wasn't there. But in LMP2, GT3 and GTE, it was possible for those teams to run in both series. Now, all the categories can. Except for GTE, of course, because that category is gone, and LMP2 because, well, WEC doesn't run LMP2 anymore except for Le Mans. And the GT as a road car came back onto the market in 2005, as the Ford Motor Company was celebrating its 100th year in manufacturing and they wanted to revive some of the more classic names. Now outwardly, the 2005 GT, or Mark II, was released 40 years after the original GT40 hit the track in 1965, so it was a celebration all round for the car. While the cars looked outwardly similar with the Mark II having a more modern look to it, the newer one was also 4 inches taller, so that people on the larger side might actually be able to fit into it. Like Jeremy Clarkson, who got himself on the waiting list for one. All 6'5" of him. Not that Jeremy actually got to drive it because it kept breaking down. Dan Gurney, who raced the GT40 at Le Mans, was also 6'5", and the GT40 got its name because the car was 40 inches tall, but because Dan Gurney was so much taller than was able to be fit into the actual car, they had to cut a hole in the roof and then put this little bubble that could accommodate his head, and it was called the Gurney bubble. I swear I am not making that up. In 2015, the third generation GT was unveiled and was no longer called the GT40 because it was now 44 inches tall, and there was also some debate over who owned the rights to the name, and it got unveiled at the North American Motor Show in 2015. Much like the Mark II, the Mark III was heavily inspired by its grandfather, and it looked like a GT40, but just, modernised a bit to bring it into the modern era. A bit like how Fiat has done with the 500 over the years, or BMW with the Mini. But Ford got it 100% right with this thing. It's an absolute beauty, and it's a toss-up between a GT and a Lexus LFA if I was to ever hit it big on the Euro Millions. And it's the Mark III that Ford adapted into a GTE. But it wouldn't be the first time that Ford had adapted a road-going GT into a racing car since the 1960s. Ford had also homologated the Mark II into the GT1 category, running it through the 2009 GT Championship. For the newly rebranded FIA GT1 World Championship season, 4 cars were brought along with 2 teams running 2 cars each. But any attempt at recapturing that 60s Le Mans success was unsuccessful, as at the 2010 Le Mans 24 Hours, all 3 cars broke down. I should also point out here that there was also a GT3 version of the Mark II, the one that was adapted into a GT1. At least I think that's how things went. There's not a lot of information available for those 2 particular cars. I think it was a Mark II that was then adapted, but someone might need to confirm that for me. But either way, Chip Ganassi was going to be using the Mark III and homologating that into a GTE. GTE was GT3 but with the gloves taken off, for want of a better term. GT3s have anti-lock brakes as well as traction control, while GTE just has traction control. Essentially, GTE is GT3 Plus. While GT3 has a lot of standardised parts to try and bring the cost down, GTE leaves a lot of the design of the car open for more OEM parts and more of a departure from the design of the original car. I mean, I want to say it's a bit like Group B, but it's not a bit like Group B. But either way, GTE just uses the chassis, engine block and cylinder heads from the original car, while the GT3s have to remain pretty close to the originals. GTEs were also a lot faster than GT3. They were lighter, produced more downforce and ran different specs of tyres, with more adjustments being able to be made to things like the gearbox because, according to what I've read online, you can change the ratios, which, combined with more adjustability in general, meant that a GTE could be tuned on a per-track basis, while a GT3 is basically build it and run it, and then BOP does the rest. As is often the case with categories like this, they just end up being a complete sinkhole for the manufacturers. By the time the FIA announced that it was going to be phasing out GTE starting in 2021, there were just 4 cars in GTE Pro at Le Mans. 4. Not teams. Cars. So, Ford's entry. I remember being pretty excited at the time because for all intents and purposes, it was a Ford GT40. My dad was alive for the original. I wasn't. I might look like I was, but I most definitely wasn't. But it's a GT40, kind of, and I can drive it on iRacing. Probably can't do officials with it now, but at least I can drive it. Oh no, there is still a GTE series, and it's at Watkins Glen this week. Brilliant, I might have to try that, but I doubt anyone will be driving. It's the same with the IndyCars. IndyCars are dead on iRacing on European time zones, it's a joke. And this is the iRacing car that you're seeing now painted in the Ganassi livery, because that way we can have a good look at the car. And speaking of having a good look at cars, I've got something for you on Friday. Teasers, I know, but this is what Ford brought to the party in 2016. In the middle was Ford's EcoBoost V6 that was a 3.5 litre engine that was then turbocharged to produce something in the region of 495 horsepower, with the overall weight being about 1.3 tonnes. So a proper sports car. Although if it had used a V8 it might have made it even better than it already was. Ford was well and truly on the EcoBoost wagon at this point, so using the V6 over a V8 was as much marketing as it was a performance and fuel efficiency choice. As for drivers, they had a star-studded lineup. Over the years, drivers such as Sebastian Bourdais, Ryan Briscoe, Scott Dixon, Andy Priaulx, Marino Franchitti, Tony Kanaan and Harry Tincknell all raced this beauty at some point. I think Harry still has his road-going GT. At least he told me he did, but that was getting on for 5 years ago. The car debuted at the 24 Hours of Daytona in IMSA at the start of 2016, and both cars finished coming home in 7th and 9th, which is, pretty decent for a first time out. It's not a win, but, they finished. But it did take its first IMSA victory at Laguna Seca, the 4th race of the IMSA season in 2016. The 67 car, driven by Ryan Briscoe and Richard Westbrook, took the class victory after Westbrook went on a fuel save towards the end, managing to complete 52 laps of the Laguna Seca circuit on one tank, while the other cars around him had to make an extra fuel stop. Westbrook's fuel saving won Ford the race by about 12 seconds or so from Alessandro Perguidi in the Ferrari, who came in behind. But it's at Le Mans in 2016 where Ford would take its most important victory, 50 years after it had originally done so in 1966. It's too bad that the win for Ford is overshadowed by that Toyota breakdown in the final minutes of the race. It was essentially the start of the final lap that the Toyota LMP1 driven by Kazuki Nakajima lost power and came to a stop by the pit wall just before the line. The Porsche 919 of Mark Lieb, Neil Yanni and Romain Dumas overtook that Toyota and then took the victory, when Toyota looked like it was finally going to win a Le Mans on merit. But it just was not to be. But we're here for the GT. I've done the Toyota at Le Mans before in its own video, but it's true that the breakdown overshadowed everything else. The Fords had taken a 1-2 in the GTE Pro class, with the fastest qualifying with a 351.185, the second doing a 351.497. Now 3/10 over a lap at Le Mans is practically a photo finish, but the second Ford was only a 10th ahead of the AF Corsa Ferrari, which had managed to sandwich itself in between the other two Ganassi Fords. 4 GTs in total were entered, all carrying the numbers of the years that Ford had won at Le Mans: 66, 67, 68 and 69. But the race wasn't going to be easy for them. Not at all. The 67 had problems immediately. There was something iffy with the gearbox and it pulled into the pit lane before the race even started. The other 3, along with the rest of the field, pulled away behind the safety car because the French countryside was absolutely pouring with rain. The 68 that had started on pole then fell back when the race got underway. The Ferrari took the lead and the Porsches were also making moves forward through the field. Ford and Corvette, the 2 American cars, were having a lot of trouble. The 68 was slow and the 66 and 69 were barely keeping it on the track. But as the track dried out, the Fords got faster, with the Porsches then going slower. Soon the 68 was back in front of the Porsches and going after the Ferrari. It was the 1966 race all over again. Ford versus Ferrari. The marketing teams at Ferrari, Ford, the FIA and ACO must have been licking their lips over how much media coverage that this was going to generate. The Ferraris just had a performance edge on the Fords. The Risi Competizione Ferrari was also pretty much the only one still in the race because the other ones were starting to have problems, with the Ford, the number 68 Ford that is, and the Risi Competizione Ferrari swapping positions pretty much every hour. But because Ford was having better pit stops, they were inching ahead just through, the pit stops. But the 68 Ford was also having problems. The radio was broken and then the fuel gauge wasn't working properly. Bourdais, who was born in Le Mans as it so happens, had done a triple stint during the night with no radio and the electrics on the fritz, not being able to trust how much fuel was in his car, and he called it the most stressful time of his life. The radio had gone out for 40 minutes and he couldn't see the pit boards at the side of the track, so basically he had to make his own pit calls, probably through counting how many laps he'd done. If he'd run out of fuel at Le Mans, he would have looked like an idiot, and if he'd pitted too early, it might have screwed their strategies later on in the race. In his first stint, that was when he lost the radio, but then in the second stint, the dash lost power completely. He did have the radio back and he had the ability to change gear, but he couldn't see his speed or his fuel anymore. And crucially, he had no kill switch or speed limiter, and the traction control was also being temperamental as hell. He had to guess the speed limit in the pits using an Aston Martin as a reference, and was yanked out the car by Dirk Muller while trying to turn the car off so the team could refuel. Ford put fuel in the car while the car was still running, which resulted in a drive-through penalty, but changing the steering wheel finally cured the technical gremlins. The 68 went on to win the race, winning Le Mans on the 50th anniversary of its first win in 1966. Ricci Competizione was second, with the 69 Ford in third and then the 66 in fourth. The 67 meanwhile recovered to finish ninth after starting dead last, which isn't a bad return, all things considered. But the Toyota breakdown had managed to do something else in all of this. It had completely extinguished the fires that had been burning because a lot of the teams were accusing Ford of not quite playing by the rules. Ford and Ferrari had been accused by other teams of sandbagging, and this is all to do with the balance of performance rules that the FIA, ACO, IMSA and so on apply to the cars so that it can do two things. Firstly, it's to annoy the purists on the internet that want to see the fastest cars win and nothing else, not realising that without BOP, teams will just spend and spend and spend and drive the costs up and up and up to the point that the category becomes too expensive and the FIA has to can it. And then those same purists will spend the next 5 years complaining about how the replacement category isn't as good as the category that just got canned for being too expensive and nobody wanting to take part. Aside from that, it means that you get a lot of cool shapes on the grid and a variety of makes and engine types. If a car is doing badly, and it's car, not team, it can get a leg up. The authorities can allow some more power, they can allow some more turbo boost, and they can take weight and drag off the car. If a car is dominating, they'll add weight, reduce turbo boost, and put a restrictor on. And Chris Harris talked about this in his video where he ran the 24 Hours of Spa. Mercedes were found to have been a little bit cheeky and were told to start right from the back of the grid. The reason Ford was being accused of sandbagging was because they'd suddenly got a warp drive in the back and not a V6. They turned up to the Le Mans test prior to the Le Mans weekend starting and they set some times, as did everybody else. But then in qualifying, they were 5 seconds a lap faster than they'd been at any point during those test days, with Ford putting this down to running low fuel and the test days being about reliability and not showing their hand when it came to pace. They also put it down to atmospheric pressure on qualifying days being different, and that apparently helped the performance as well. But the noise from the other teams was so loud that the FIA and ACO saw fit to change the BOP in between qualifying and the race. The Fords and Ferraris kept their qualifying positions, but they'd had some bits and pieces done to the cars to try and slow them down, and I think it's the only time it's ever been done. Usually BOP is done before the event and then it's locked in. The Ford was hit with a 10 kilogram nerf with the turbo mated to that 3.5 litre V6 turned down. The Ferrari was hit with a 15 kilo nerf and the pressures on their turbos turned down as well. The Corvette was allowed an extra 2 litres of fuel and the Aston was also allowed a little bit more power, just to help them out a little bit. But people at the time were annoyed, because they felt that Ford and Ferrari had been taking the mick and the ACO and FIA were allowing it because it would have meant a repeat of 1966, which is the only thing they apparently wanted to see. One person in the comments said at the time that BOP should just be renamed SCR. Screw Corvette Racing. Hang on a minute, was that written by my mate Andy? Because he's a pretty unashamed Corvette fanboy, but it was the typical fan reaction. Calling it a farce, saying that any time a Corvette is barely a tenth faster than anybody else they hit it with a BOP nerf, and so on. One person on this comment section I've seen from 2016 is calling the whole thing anti-American. I'm sure it is anti-American, but it was an American car that was going 5 seconds a lap faster than it had done previously and apparently been allowed to do so. I don't understand people on the internet sometimes. Ford naturally denied the allegations. Harry Tinknell called the claims that they were sandbagging as bollocks, with Ford saying that the only people who are happy with BOP are the ones who are winning. And love or hate Ford, they're right. I've done stuff with SRO Esports and it's all you hear about. All you hear about is the bloody BOP. You lost to a faster car and team. Deal with it. The car won the 6 Hours of Fuji and the 6 Hours of Shanghai during the rest of the 2016 WEC season, and then won the opening round of the 2017 season at Silverstone. But for the 2017 race at Le Mans, the ACO took things a bit more seriously than they had done in 2016 with regards to BOP, making sure that the race was between more than just a Ford and a Ferrari. The GTs were given a massive 20-kilogram hit and the turbo was turned right down, while in effect the cars were all balanced to the Ferrari. And the FIA had thought about locking in the BOP at the start of the season, but then abandoned that proposal. Ford finished second in that 2017 Le Mans, the 67 car of Priaulx, Tincknell and Pip Durrani finishing second to the Aston Vantage of Darren Turner, Johnny Adam and Daniel Serra. The top 5 in GTE was 5 different manufacturers. The class was won by an Aston Martin, followed by a Ford, followed by a Corvette, then followed by a Porsche, and then finally a Ferrari. So it looked like everything had worked properly. The BOP had done exactly what it was designed to do. The next repeat manufacturer, if you want to call it that, was a Ford that had finished behind that Ferrari. The Ford continued to run until 2019 and never won Le Mans again. Well, it did win GTE AM in 2019, the last year it ran at Le Mans, but it was disqualified for a fuel irregularity. Its tank was too big. But the GT was a nice return from Ford, if a tiny bit controversial. It looked like the old car, and whether it was sandbagged or not, it went like the old car. For it to win Le Mans 50 years after it originally did does seem a bit convenient, and I'm sure the BOP stuff will be argued about in the comments. But it's still a beauty of a car, and racing heritage done right. They didn't bring back the name and then make a complete hash of it, which is something that Ford has recently done with the Capri electric car. And with Ford on its way back to Formula 1 and endurance racing in the very near future, it makes you wonder if Ford could come back and continue that long legacy of building winning racing cars. Can they do so when they do come back? Well, only time, money and, a bit of balance of performance will tell. So then, a look at the incredible, if a tiny bit controversial Ford GT that returned to Le Mans in 2016 and ran until 2019. If this has been a fun look through the history books, then do give the video a like so I know I've done a good job. And for more from the channel, click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and also get the bell on so you'll always be notified of a future video. Massive thanks to REC Watches and also the people on your screen who are supporters via Patreon. And if you want to help keep the lights on around here, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks if you want to buy me a coffee or otherwise do a one and done donation, and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.